So Rosh Hashanah is fast approaching. There is a group of Jews who travels every year for Rosh Hashanah to the city of Uman in Ukraine. In Uman is buried Rabbi Nachman of Breslov, a great Hasidic Rebbe, and there are Jews who like to spend the holiday of Rosh Hashanah in the holy atmosphere of Uman. However, this year, their travel plans have been disrupted. Due to the coronavirus, they're not able to go to Uman. So what did they do? A few thousand Jews flew to Belarus, right? They flew to White Russia. And somehow they felt that they're going to be able to travel from White Russia into Ukraine. I don't know why or how they thought that was going to happen. If Ukraine doesn't let them in, I don't understand how they're going to get from Belarus to Ukraine. But the reality is there's a few thousand people that for all intents and purposes are stranded in Belarus. Now, I don't know why they're stranded because they could get on a plane and go back to Israel where they flew from. But the reality is there's thousands of people who literally for like 3 weeks are practically camping out without kosher food and are having a challenging time. Chabad in Belarus is doing whatever they can to provide food for them, but it's a weird scenario. Why are these people doing this? They're doing it because Rosh Hashanah is coming. Rosh Hashanah is important. Rosh Hashanah means something, and it's going to set the tone for the rest of the year. They're taking it seriously, and they want to maximize the experience of Rosh Hashanah to the greatest degree possible, to the extent that they're even flying to Belarus to see if there's a way they could sneak into Ukraine, because they think that that's how they're going to get the best experience possible. So Rosh Hashanah is coming. We have to prepare. We have to do what's possible to make sure that we get the most out of Rosh Hashanah. Because even though it's true that this year is going to be different, this year we're affected by the coronavirus, but it's still Rosh Hashanah, right? It's still Rosh Hashanah. So we still need to do what we can to prepare ourselves and to maximize the holiday. What better preparation could we have for the holiday than to hear from Moshe himself? This past Shabbos, we read in the Torah that Moshe gathers all the Jewish people together to speak to them. And the commentaries explain, when is he gathering them? It's Rosh Hashanah. Before Rosh Hashanah, so to speak, Moshe is gathering the Jewish people to inspire and motivate them. What does he say? He says, "For this commandment which I command you this day is not concealed from you, nor is it far away. It is not in heaven that you should say, who will go up to heaven for us and fetch it for us to tell it to us so that we can fulfill it. Nor is it beyond the sea that you should say, who will cross to the other side of the sea for us and fetch it for us to tell it to us so that we can fulfill it. Rather, this thing is very close to you. It is in your mouth and in your heart so that you can fulfill it." Moshe tells us, don't think that Judaism is too hard. Don't think that the mitzvahs are out of your reach. Don't think that living a rich Jewish lifestyle is not for you and rather for someone else. He says, absolutely not. It's for you. It's natural for you. It's close to you. You could do it in your mouth. You can speak of it. You could say it. You could read it. You could do it. You could pray it. You could learn it. It's close to you in your heart. You could feel it. You could have the emotional experience, the highs, the lows, the love, the emotion, all of that. You can fulfill it. Absolutely. Now, I ask you the question, is it really close to observe the Torah? It's very nice that Moshe is saying this to us, but do you really feel that when Moshe says it's very close for you, this is like a natural thing for you to be able to do you really feel in your own life experience that it's that easy? I would have to imagine that the answer for most people is that it's actually not that easy. There's a lot of challenges and there's a lot of obstacles when it comes to studying Torah, when it comes to living a Jewish lifestyle. But Shabbos is not the easiest thing to observe. There are many restrictions that relate to Shabbos that make it not so natural for a person to do. Keeping kosher, that's going to limit your options when it comes to food. There are many inconveniences that it's going to throw. So Moshe says it's very close to you could do it. We don't necessarily experience that in life. This question is so powerful that it literally is the foundational book of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, the book of the Tanya, right? The Tanya is literally based on this verse. It says on the title page of the book of Tanya, the book of Tanya, which is the foundational book of Chabad Hasidic philosophy, is to explain how it's actually true, that it is natural, it is very close for each and every one of us to be able to observe Torah and mitzvahs and live a full and complete Torah lifestyle. So we're going to attempt to give at least one answer to this question today, and you're going to see how the answer is relevant not just to this question, but to Rosh Hashanah. That as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, the answer to this question is going to play an absolute critical role. So we're going to explore the story of a biblical figure that odds are you've never heard of before. Now, there are biblical figures that are very famous. There are some who are famous for being good, for being righteous. Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, Esther, all these great heroines of the biblical era. There are also villains. Esav, Yishmael, Balak, Bilam, all kinds of villains as well. Today, we're going to learn about Palti ben Layish. Have you ever heard of this word, this term before? Anyone? Palti ben Layish, a great hero of the Bible. He lived in the era of King David, but before we get into his life, we need a little bit of an introduction. Every Friday night before we begin the meal, we sing the Eishes Chayil. The Eishes Chayil is chapter 31 of the book of Mishli, the book of Proverbs, authored by King Solomon Shlomo Melech, and it praises the Jewish woman. Now we are going to go to the last line of Eishes Chayil. It says, charm is false and beauty is vain. A woman who fears God, she should be praised. Now, this is not a verse that necessitates a lot of explanation. We all understand and appreciate that as much we may enjoy charm and as much as we like beauty, it's only skin deep. And at the end of the day, it's whether a person has a beautiful heart and a beautiful soul, that's what counts. Looks are fabulous, but if a person's rotten on the inside, it absolutely means nothing. Now, in 1991, there's a great video where a woman from Israel, she had just won the Miss Israel competition. And she comes by the Rebbe and asks the Rebbe for a blessing. So the Rebbe gives her a beautiful blessing. And he says to her, you should know, Jewish tradition says, charm is false and beauty is vain. However, charm is only false and beauty is only vain for a woman that does not fear God. But when it's a woman who fears God, charm is not false, beauty is not vain. Charm and beauty enhance and are enhanced by her observance of Torah and mitzvahs as well. So it is not only a negative, it absolutely can be an asset as well. So that is the straightforward interpretation of the verse. The Talmud, however, gives quite the interesting commentary on this verse. The Talmud says, Rabbi Yochanan said, what is meant by the verse, many daughters have done valiantly, but you surpassed them all? Many daughters refer to Joseph and Boaz, and you surpassed them all to Palti, the son of Layish. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachman said in Rabbi Yonatan's name, what is meant by the verse, charm is false and beauty is vain? A woman who fears God shall be praised. Charm is false. This refers to the trial of Joseph. And beauty is vain. This refers to Boaz. Who fears God, as she shall be praised. This refers to Palti, the son of Layish. So who are all these three people, and why does the Talmud comment on this? So the story of Yosef, hopefully everyone knows. He had a special close relationship with his father Yaakov. He did not get along with his brothers. His brothers kidnapped him. They were going to kill him. Instead, they sold him as a slave. He makes his way down to Egypt as a slave in the house of Potiphar. Potiphar's wife had his eyes for him. She tried to seduce him again and again and again, but he refused. One day, no one was in the home, And she literally grabbed him, threw herself at him, and he ran out of the house, leaving his shirt in her hands. This is story number one. Story number one, where it says charm is false. What does that represent? That represents Yosef. He was not swayed by the charm of Potiphar's wife, and he ran. He is being praised. However, there's another interpretation. The interpretation is that you might think that Yosef is so charming. Charm is false. Yosef is not to be praised that much for what he did. Of course he did what he did. There are others who deserve even more praise. Who deserves even more praise? We go to the next line, and that is Boaz. Beauty is vain. What's the story of Boaz? So this takes us back to Ruth and Naomi. So we read in the book of Ruth that Naomi was married to Elimelech. She had 2 sons. They were a wealthy, honorable family in Israel. A famine breaks out. They leave the land of Israel. The 2 sons marry princesses of Moab, of Egypt. The sons die. The husbands die. Ruth converts to Judaism, and she says to Naomi, wherever you go, I go. Your people are my people. They go back to Israel, and Ruth needs to get married. So she is told that according to Jewish law, you are first in line to marry a relative. Boaz is a great Jewish leader, wealthy, respected, a rabbi. Go to him and he's going to marry you. So the advice given to her is literally sneak into his house, lay down at the foot of his bed. Right? They were a lot more forward in the biblical era. Boaz has an opportunity to be intimate with her on that night, but he does not do so even with her at his bed. Says, we will wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow we will clarify whether I'm the closest relative and whether we should get married. So the Talmud says, beauty is vain. Boaz was not distracted by the beauty. Beauty is vain. He was righteous. He surpassed it. But then again, we have another commentary that says, you think that what Boaz did was beautiful? Beauty is vain. He did what he was supposed to do. Don't start praising him. You know who did something that was truly impressive? That was more impressive? That is Palti, the son of Layish. What he did is more impressive than Yosef. What he did is more impressive than Boaz. So let's see, what exactly did he do? Right? Who is Palti ben Layish? Okay? So we know charm is false, beauty is vain. Okay. Who is Palti ben Layish? So the story of Palti ben Layish begins with the famous battle of young David and Goliath. What is the background to the battle? Why was David fighting Goliath? Goliath was a soldier for the perpetual enemy of the Jewish people, the Philistines. The Philistines, they controlled this particular area of Israel. Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Ekron, Gath. This was the territory of the Philistines. They were not just fighting with the Jewish people in the era of King David, but it went all the way back to Abraham. Abraham was fighting with the Philistines. When the Jews left Egypt, instead of going a straight route into the land of Israel, they went on a circuitous route. Why? To avoid the Philistines who like to fight with the Jewish people. Shimshon, Samson, he was constantly fighting the Jewish people. Samuel, Shmuel, he was constantly dealing with the Philistines. So much so that the Jewish people came to Shmuel and said, the only way that we are going to be able to defeat the Philistines is if we have a Jewish king. If we have a Jewish king, we could defeat the Philistines. At the time that King Shaul, the first Jewish king, was appointed as a king of the Jewish people, the Philistines controlled a large amount of the land of Israel. The Jewish people living there were forced to pay a tax to the Philistines. There was a Philistine governor who was essentially ruling the Jewish people. It was prohibited for Jews to own weapons. Not only could they not own weapons, they were not allowed to have any tools that can sharpen their farm equipment. They had to go to the Philistine government to sharpen their plow hooks and so on. That's the degree, the control that the Philistines had. And the Jews were at their wits' end. They appealed to the prophet Shmuel. King Saul, Shaul HaMelech, is appointed to be the first king. They start battling the Philistines, Shaul HaMelech, together with his son Jonathan, and they start winning many, many battles. But then they hit a wall, a brick wall. The name of this brick wall is Goliath, a giant of a man, a mighty Philistine warrior, head and shoulders above everyone around them. He taunts the Jewish people. He taunts them and says, I dare you, anyone, come fight me one-on-one. For 40 days in a row, he engages in one-on-one battles with the greatest of the Jewish warriors, wipes them out, right? Kills them. It's demoralizing to the Jewish people. While this is taking place, a young man who is a shepherd named David is instructed by his father, take some food to your brothers who are at the battleground. They're battling the Philistines, go there. He goes there, and this is what he sees. And while he was speaking with them, behold, the champion named Goliath, the Philistine from Gath, was coming up from the ranks of the Philistines, and he spoke the same words as before, and David heard. And all the men of Israel, upon seeing the man, fled from before him and were exceedingly frightened. And the men of Israel said, have you seen this man who is coming up? For he's coming up to taunt Israel. And it will be that the man who will kill him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and he will give him his daughter, and he will make his father's house unrestricted in Israel. David accepts the challenge. He declines any armor. All he takes with him is his slingshot. He flings a rock at the head of Goliath. It penetrates. He falls down, right? The famous battle scene taken by the original iPhone, if I'm not mistaken. And David ran and stood up to the Philistine, and he took his sword and drew it from its sheath and slew him. And with it severed his head. And the Philistines saw that their hero had died, and they fled. So the Jewish people have a great victory, a lasting victory against their enemies, the Philistines. Who is the hero of the battle? Young David. Young David is ready to receive his reward. He's meant to marry the daughter of King Saul, but King Saul says, wait a minute. This guy David is too popular. People love him when they should love me. He's the hero. I should be the hero. I can't handle this. I am not going to give him my daughter. So he devises a challenge and a test for David, which he believes David will not pass, and he will lose his life. Normally, people get married, there's a dowry, there's a financial transaction that takes place, especially in the biblical era. He says, David, forget about the whole finances. I want Philistine blood. And Shaul said, so shall you say to David, the king has no desire in a dowry, but in 100 foreskins of the Philistines to avenge him upon the king's enemies. So they had a very interesting way of showing people that they were killed. But Shaul, it makes scalping seem almost kind of nice. But Shaul thought to make David fall by the hand to the Philistines. And his servant told David these words, and the thing pleased David to become the king's son-in-law, and the days of the deadline did not expire. And David arose, and he and his men went, and he slew 200 men of the Philistines, and brought their foreskins. And they delivered them in full to the king, in order to become the king's son-in-law, and the king gave him Michal, his daughter, as a wife. And Shaul saw, and knew that the Lord was with David, and Michal, Shaul's daughter, loved him. And Shaul grew still more afraid of David, and Shaul was hostile to David all the days. So King Shaul's goal is, he has to personally kill 100 Philistines and bring their foreskins. He's going to be wiped out. He's going to be dead. I won't have to deal with him anymore. What does he do? He kills 200. And he drops off at the foot of King Shaul 200 Philistine foreskins. His fame, his reputation grows. His reputation as a hero is even greater than it was before. King Shaul can't handle it. King Shaul tries and tries again and tries again to kill David. Instead of his son-in-law, he becomes his enemy. On one occasion, when King Saul's emissaries were on their way to kill David, Michal realized it, recognized it, and helped David escape out the window. She then took some statues, put it in their bed, put the covers on top to make it look like David was still sleeping, and shooed them away, saying that David was sick, and saved his life. So David is chased away. David is gone. He's running for his life. What does King Shaul do? What does Saul HaMelech do? The fabulous father-in-law? And Shaul had given his daughter Michal to the wife of David, to Palti, the son of Layish. So here Palti comes on the scene. King Saul tries to kill David. David runs away. King Saul has a new husband for his daughter. His daughter Michal is now married to Palti, the son of Layish. For how long are they married to each other? For many years. The marriage lasted until the Philistines killed King Saul. Once King Saul was dead, David is able to come back. And David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, the son of Shaul, saying, "Give me my wife Michal, whom I betrothed to myself with 100 foreskins of Philistines." And Ishbosheth sent and took her from a man, from Paltiel, the son of Layish. So King David is reunited back together with his wife. Now, before we continue, there's a question that I hope that you have in your mind. How does this work? King David is married to Michal. He chases him away. He didn't kill him. He chases him away. And all of a sudden, he brings in another man to marry Michal. What is that called in English?
Polygamy.
Polygamy.
Polygamy usually is when one man is married to two women. Here we have one woman is married to two men. Is that still polygamy? There's a different word in Judaism for that.
Adultery.
It's called adultery. So what's the story? The story is King Shaul was a tremendous Torah scholar. Tremendous Torah scholar. He would not have been made king of the Jewish people if he was not a Torah giant. Him, together with the Beis Din, with his rabbinic court, ruled that the marriage of King David to Michal was illegitimate. We're not going to go into all the details, but briefly, when a husband marries a wife, he gives her a ring, correct? Under the chuppah, he gives her a ring. This represents a financial transaction which begins the marriage. What did King David, what did young David give to solidify his marriage? Can anyone remember?
Foreskins.
Foreskins.
Oh, okay.
There was a Jewish legal debate. Are foreskins worth anything? Do they have any value? Can you enter into a marriage with a bag of foreskins? Suffice it to say, David said yes. King Shaul and his rabbinic court said no. David and Michal were never married in any legitimate kosher Jewish sense. So therefore, King Saul takes Palti, brings him to his daughter Michal. They are now married. Right? David comes back. Palti is removed from the marriage, and the happy couple is together once again. Now I ask you this question. How do you think Palti felt about this whole story?
He was used.
This guy was taken by King Saul, forced into a marriage that was very questionable, whether it's adultery, whether it was not adultery. It was definitely an issue that was debated. Right? It wasn't some type of clear-cut issue. He's thrown into this marriage, and then King David comes back, and he loses his wife. What does the Talmud say? Well, first, okay, he had no choice. He did not agree with it, right? He felt that she was really married to King David. What does the Talmud say about Palti? That he showed the greatest act of self-control, even greater than Yosef, and even greater than Boaz. Why? His self-control was greater than Yosef because who was the woman that Yosef avoided that relationship with? She was a married woman. If Yosef would have had a relationship, that would have been adultery. That would have been a crime. That would have not just been immoral, but it's perhaps one of the worst sins that's around. So is Yosef a hero for rejecting her? Yes, because there was temptation. But at the end of the day, Yosef did what was expected of him. She was a married woman. Then you have Boaz. Is Boaz a mensch because he did not sleep with Ruth on that night when he had the opportunity to? Absolutely, he's a mensch. But you know what? They were both single. If they would have been intimate with each other, they're not exactly violating one of the 10 commandments. What did he do? He was not intimate with her. For how long? 1 day. That's it. 1 day. How much praise do you get for saying, instead of doing this tonight, let's wait tomorrow and make it legal? He's a mensch. He's fabulous. He's great. But you cannot compare that to what Palti had to deal with. What did Palti have to deal with? He lived with her for years as husband and wife. That's how they lived. That's how they presented themselves. That's how everyone viewed them. But he never touched her, not even once. What kind of a woman was Michal? The Talmud says that she was so beautiful, she was so attractive, that any man who saw her started drifting towards her. It created rifts and frictions between husband and wife. A man who saw her was distracted. She had that power. She had an allure. She had a beauty. Palti lived with her for years as husband and wife, blessed by King Shaul, blessed by the Supreme Rabbinic Court. The marriage had all of the trappings of holiness and kosher, everything. But he never touched her, not even once. How did he do it? The Talmud says he is variously called Palti and Paltiel. You may remember the text where David has his wife brought to him, he's referred to as Paltiel. Rabbi Yochanan explained his name was Palti, but why was he called Paltiel? Because God extricated him from transgression. What did he do to be delivered from sin? He planted a sword between her, Michal, and himself. She said, whoever engages in this thing shall be pierced with the sword. Yes, Mushka? Yes, you can grab a paper from that bag or from over here. I have my little Mushka over here. So his name was Palti, but his name was changed to Paltiel because God was with him. God extricated him. God gave him the strength. What was the vehicle that he used? What was the vessel that he used to draw down God's strength within him? He took a sword. He put that sword right in the middle of the bed. He said, if either one of us shall cross this line here, this sword should be the end of us. Now, let's reflect on the circumstances of this situation.
Rabbi, may I just ask a question?
Absolutely, please, yes.
And I didn't catch, how many years was he with Michal?
I don't know the exact number, but it definitely is years. It's plural.
So they stayed celibate for years.
Yes. This took place for years. Now think about the circumstances surrounding this marriage that lasted for multiple years, where they did not touch each other. Number one, King Saul approved of it all. The rabbinic court approved of it all, and they lived for multiple years as husband and wife. Now, while it's true that Palti's position was that she was married really to David and he shouldn't be intimate with her, but you have to imagine that 1 month goes by, 6 months goes by, a year goes by. What is a person going to do? They're going to rationalize that, you know what? We're living as married people. The rabbinic court says it's kosher. The king says it's kosher. Yet he did not touch her. Night after night, he resisted the temptation. He could easily have rationalized it and be intimate with his wife. Right? How many people here have ever made a resolution and then rationalized their way out of it? Oh, it's only one piece of cake. I'm only going to eat half the cake. I went exercising this morning anyway. I'm going to exercise this morning afterwards. People rationalize away all the time. He was in a perfect scenario to rationalize away this relationship. But he did not rationalize the relationship. He never touched her, not even once. What did he do? He put a sword in between them. If we cross this line, they will be stabbed by the sword.
Rabbi,
Yes.
isn't there even maybe something that the Torah would say against this choice? They're husband and wife, they should be intimate. There's a mitzvah in intimacy, and they were married, and it was legal.
That you are making a very strong argument, an argument that Palti and Michal too, but certainly Palti could have made. He could have said, listen, the Torah values marriage. Not only that, right, a wife is guaranteed that she's going to be able to enjoy the conjugal rights that are owed to her, that she's going to be able to have a fulfilling, meaningful marital relationship. And if the king says it's kosher and the rabbinical court says it's kosher, not only would it be easy, but as you argued, Marilyn, it would be logical. You can make it into a mitzvah. It's something holy, it's something pure, it's something appropriate. But Palti said no, because Palti felt that it's not legitimate, and that King Saul was wrong, and that the Beis Din was wrong, and that David was really married, and he was inserted into the situation by King Saul, and he's not going to get involved. And he put a sword right in the bed. The question that I have for you now is that it may seem very noble and very dramatic, but at the end of the day, it's a little bit pointless. Why? I ask you, they are intimate with each other. Who is going to use the sword? Which one? Who is exactly using the sword? If they are now involved and engaged in a consensual marital relationship, is someone just going to decapitate the other person? Of course not. So what is the point of the sword? Right? At the end of the day, no one's going to use it. The answer is like this. How did Palti feel night one of his forced marriage? Imagine Palti is this wonderful, righteous Jewish man. There's a knock on his door. The king's soldiers take him away, and they force him into a marriage with his daughter Michal. What is his attitude? On night one, he has complete, absolute moral clarity. He is convinced beyond the shadow of a doubt that this marriage is illegitimate, that Michal is married to David, and he would not touch Michal with a 10-foot pole. Okay? He is not going to have anything to do with her. He is strong. He is resolute. His moral clarity is absolutely 100%. She is not his wife. She is off limits, period. How will he feel in 1 month, 6 months, in a year? This is what Palti's thinking. Palti's thinking, today, Right now, I have absolute moral clarity. But what about 1 month living with this absolutely gorgeous woman, physically and spiritually? 6 months go by. We're living with each other. We're married. We have a relationship. We have a connection. There's a friendship there. A year goes by. Today, I feel strong. How will I feel in a month? How will I feel in 6 months? How will I feel in a year? He knows that people rationalize. He knows that people say, you know what? King Saul said it's kosher. The Beis Din said it's kosher. Every person in society thinks it's kosher. If I'm intimate with her, no one knows if I am intimate with her. No one knows if I'm not intimate with her. What's the problem? He says it's very easy to rationalize. It's very easy to use some type of loophole. So what does he do? He says, I need a reminder of the moral clarity that I have tonight. That at any time in the future, when I'm shaky, that I'm wavering, I'll have something to look at that will remind me of the clarity that I felt on this night and give me the strength to continue. So what does he do? He sticks a sword in that bed. No one's killing anyone, right? No one's chopping anyone. But it is a reminder that every time he feels a little bit shaky, he says, this is who I am. This is what I believe. This is who I aspire to be. And the absolute moral clarity that I felt on that night, it will remind me that I need to feel it on this night and every night going forward, whether in 1 month, 6 months, or in a year. And it is of this that the Talmud says, who is the person that should be praised? Yosef was great. Boaz was great. But Palti, what he had to withstand, no one had to withstand. He had the blessings of King Saul, the blessings of the Beis Din, but he did not touch her even once, and he used that sword as an incredible reminder. All right, any questions before we continue? Because we are going to take, yes, Mitchell.
Oh, go ahead.
He wasn't in chains after he was brought over that night. Why would he sacrifice his life? He couldn't. If there was a marriage, it could have been annulled because it was a forced marriage. And she wasn't divorced, so she was still married to the first husband. And I don't understand why the man gave up his life for this story for the future.
So you have to put yourself in the mindset of what it was like to be alive 3,000 years ago. Kings had incredible power. They had incredible control. He was not a free man to do as he pleased. You rebel against the king, off with your head. So the king said, you are now married to this woman. It was either you're married to this woman or we chop your head off. He said, you know what? I may be living with her, but I will not be intimate with her because I believe that she's married to David. Even though in the eyes of the king and the rabbinic court and the entire Jewish community is totally kosher, I don't think that's the case. And therefore he resisted.
So
Yes,
I have did Palti and David, did they have like a special relationship before? I mean, did he feel some particular loyalty to him?
It's a good question, but I am not aware of any particular relationship that they had. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm curious of the same thing. What does David have to say about Palti? I don't know. That's a great question.
Okay.
So we're going to take this story of Palti and use it to answer our original question. The original question is, Moshe gathers the Jewish people. This is his pre-Rosh Hashanah speech. Torah, mitzvahs, Jewish lifestyle. It's easy. It's very close. This is natural for you to do. But wait a minute. This is contrary to our own personal experience. What do you mean it's very close? What do you mean it's natural? So the Alter Rebbe tells us, you don't have to be a tzaddik. You don't have to be an angel. Rather, there's a tool that you can use that every human being is born with. It's natural to the human condition. And that is the exact trick that Palti did. Put a sword in your bedroom. what does putting a sword in the bed represent? It represents the idea of absolute moral clarity. And we'll explain. The way the Alter Rebbe introduces the idea, he says that Jews throughout history have expressed an unbelievable moral clarity and dedication and devotion to God, that a Jew would choose the sword over the cross. That's how committed, that's how dedicated, that's how clear it was, our priorities, that would choose the sword over the cross. I've mentioned to you in the past, there's a book and a documentary called Constantine's Sword. Anyone heard it, have seen it? It was authored by a former Catholic priest. A Catholic priest who, when he learned about the history of the church's anti-Semitism, couldn't take it anymore. He said, there's no way that I could live and preach and teach as a Catholic priest when I know what the church did. So he wrote a book, and then it was made into a documentary called Constantine's Sword. In the documentary, he goes to Germany. He grew up, his father was a colonel in the US Army, stationed in Germany after World War II. His mother was a very religious Christian, and she would travel to various Christian holy sites along the Rhine River. So he goes to this German town on the Rhine River, and he goes to the city hall, into the basement where they have all the records of the town history. And he starts reading from the 12th century, 11th century, that time period, about the Crusades. And he reads about the Jewish mothers who were drowning their babies in the Rhine River rather than them be converted, kidnapped and converted to Catholicism by the Crusaders. He says he's literally reading it from the book, right? The mothers are drowning themselves in the river and then being killed themselves by the Crusaders rather than their children being converted to Catholicism. That goes against every fiber of a mother's being, to kill your own child. I would say it's an impossible thing to do for a mother to kill their child. But this is the degree of clarity that exists within the Jewish people. They choose the sword over the cross. So the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, if every Jew in their heart of hearts knows that they would rather choose the sword over the cross, that means they would rather die than separate themselves from God and the Jewish people. What is a sin? A sin, a transgression, that's separating yourself from God and the Jewish people. If you would rather die than separate yourself from God and the Jewish people, how much more so you should have the ability to overcome a cheeseburger. What's harder, to be decapitated or to eat a cheeseburger? If you're willing to be decapitated, how much more so you could forego the pleasure that would come with the cheeseburger. The Alter Rebbe says, reflect on the moral clarity of choosing the sword over the cross, and that will get you over it, right? Can you resist a cheeseburger? You probably could. Now here's the text itself from the Tanya. In light of the above, we understood why our teacher Moshe, peace be upon him, in Devarim, commanded the generation that was to enter the land of Israel to recite the Shema twice daily, to acknowledge the kingdom of heaven with self-sacrifice. Although he had promised them, the Lord your God shall lay your dread and fear upon all the land. Rather, the reason is that the fulfillment of the Torah and its commandments is dependent on being constantly aware of one's readiness to surrender one's life to God for his unity's sake, so that his awareness be permanently fixed in one's heart and not depart from one's memory night and day. For in this way is one able to face one's evil nature and vanquish it always at any moment, as has been explained. So you're all familiar with the story of, what's his first name? Pearl, the American journalist that was killed in Afghanistan. He was beheaded by the Taliban. It's on film. His last words were, I'm a Jew, my father's a Jew, my mother's a Jew, right? Those are his last words. His wife could not understand. You know why? His wife was not Jewish. She said, being Jewish to my husband didn't mean anything. And that's his last words. I'm a Jew. My mother was a Jew. My father was a Jew. Because deep down in his heart of hearts, there was nothing that could separate him from God and the Jewish people. And when push came to shove and it was brought out and it was expressed, that was the only thing that mattered at that moment and at that time. So what does the Alter Rebbe say? Reflect on that. We have that within ourselves, that moral clarity. Mothers drowned their kids 1,000 years ago, right? Jonathan, I think his name was Jonathan Pearl, right? He said, I'm a Jew, my father was a Jew, and my mother was a Jew. We all have that within us, right? Reflect upon that moral clarity, and you will be able to overcome any challenge. You know, there's a very famous joke. I'm not going to give you the long version because you've heard it before. There's the guy who's late for this absolutely critical business meeting. He cannot find parking, is going around the corner 1,000 times. And he prays to God, God, if you only find me a parking space, I'll give half of the money I ever make for the rest of my life to tzedakah. All of a sudden, a car pulls out. He's got a parking spot. He says, oh, never mind, God, right? I found it, right? We get very excited in the moment, but then things pass, and all of a sudden, we rationalize ourselves into a completely different set of behaviors. When things are bad, we turn to God for help. But when things are good, very often we forget about it. Another story. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, world famous musician, he traveled to Poland, to Russia, give concerts, meet Jews, inspire and uplift them. So he tells the story of being in Poland, and he cannot find a Jew. He goes to a town, he's trying to arrange something, a concert, nobody. Nobody wants to look at him, nobody wants to talk to him, zero, there's no Jews around. Until he meets one elderly person, warm, smiling, happy, charming, invites him into his home. And Shlomo Carlebach says, I don't understand. He says, not a single person here will even look at me, yet you are so warm and friendly to me. Why? What happened? So he says, I'll tell you. He says, around World War I, there were all kinds of pogroms that took place. The non-Jewish neighbors would come into the Jewish neighborhood, they'd beat Jews, they'd kill them, they'd burn their houses down. It was terrible. One such night, we get word that people are coming towards the neighborhood, there's going to be a pogrom, hide. My mother took me to the house of the rabbi. For whatever reason, right, the house of the rabbi was considered to be a safe place or a more safe place. We go into the house, a bunch of people are there, men, women, children, and it's an absolutely freezing cold night, and I was shivering. It says the rabbi came over to me, and he whispered to me, he says, Gute Yingele, Zisa Yingele, a good, sweet, wonderful, beautiful child. And he took a cloak and covered over him. The old man said to Rabbi Carlebach, as you know, it's been 75 years since the rabbi spread his coat over me, but it still keeps me warm to this day. How do we create those moments where we have that warmth and it doesn't dissipate, we don't lose it, we don't rationalize it away? We're able to take that warmth, that moral clarity, and keep us warm and keep us strong for 75 years. We're approaching Rosh Hashanah, we're approaching Yom Kippur. These are the times where we have the greatest moral clarity. On Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we make resolutions and we say, this is who I really should be. These are my real priorities. When it comes to Judaism, maybe it's about kosher, maybe it's about mikvah, maybe it's about tefillin, maybe it's about coming to shul. But on Rosh Hashanah, we say, I want to do this mitzvah. This is what I should do. This is who I want to be. This is what's more important to me in life. Not the other things that are distracting. This is who I want to be. It could be when it comes to marriage. We want to be more sensitive. We want to be more respectful. We want to be more giving. We want to be nice. We want to listen more to what our spouses have to say. We want to pay attention better to our children, to our grandchildren. We want to help them with their homework. We want to ask them about their day. We want to spend time with them. We want to put away our cell phones. Whatever the resolution might be. Maybe it's health. You want to exercise. You want to diet, whatever it is. On Rosh Hashanah, this is a time where we have clarity. We have moral clarity on what our life should look like. However, we have to think on Rosh Hashanah, how will I feel in a month? How will I feel in 2 months? How will I feel in 6 months? Today, I'm excited about committing to go to shul every Shabbos. Today, I'm excited about having a date night with my spouse once a week. Today, I'm excited about putting my phone away at 5 p.m. and not taking it out till 8 p.m. Today, I'm excited about that. But what about in a month? What about 2 months? What about 6 months? How am I going to feel about that? Am I going to lose the passion? Am I going to lose the fire? Am I going to rationalize it away? Am I going to allow a loophole to destroy it all? We have to learn from the story of Palti ben Layish that we have to seize the moment of clarity. We have to put a picture on the wall. We have to have a sword that we could look at that can remind us how passionate we felt, how clear our thinking was, and how real that thinking was. We have to look at that sword of Palti ben Layish, and you know what? That's another definition of the word teshuvah. Teshuvah does not mean repentance. Teshuvah means return. Who are you returning to? Return to your moments of clarity. To do real teshuvah means to create that sort of Palti ben Layish in your life. To make sure there's something you can look at and that you can reflect upon that reminds you who you really are. Don't allow the distractions of life to push you off who you are. Look at that sword as Palti did, and you'll have that passion, that energy, that enthusiasm, that clarity, that motivation, the confidence to move forward. Transform your weakest points to actually be your strongest points. When things are the hardest, that sword will remind you that you need to be your strongest. And just as Palti, who followed this path, became Paltiel, that God was with him and God gave him the strength, so too when we follow down this path, God will be with us and will give us the strength to make those changes in our life, and that will keep us warm for 75 years and for all the years to come. Any questions, comments?
That was great.
Thank you. Thank you.
I never heard those stories, but it puts the whole Rosh Hashanah thing, the commitment, beautifully done. And I'll never read Ashes Chayil in the same way again.
You thought the whole time Ashes Chayil is praising women.
Yeah.
Turns out it's praising these men.
Who knew? Now I know. Very interesting.
Yeah. God willing, this Shabbos begins Rosh Hashanah, and we will be motivated, and we'll be excited, and we'll be inspired, and we have to think to ourselves, how do I take the excitement of the energy of the day and move it forward? What picture will I take and put on the wall after Yontif? What reminder will I have that I can live up to my best self, my truest self, my most real self, which is the one on Rosh Hashanah, not the one that gets distracted throughout the year. All right, so God willing, next week, I believe on Tuesday, we will have a Yom Kippur themed class, just one more second chance, divine compassion, and the nature of forgiveness. This class has been recorded. I will post it to the Shul's Facebook page, and please share it with anyone you like. So thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you enjoyed and found it meaningful and inspiring, and I look forward to seeing you all Rosh Hashanah, and have a happy, healthy, and a sweet new year, everyone.